I dropped out of college when I was 19 years old. And given that I'm 24 years old, and if I had stayed in college, I would have graduated by now, I think that sufficient time has passed for me to make a reasonable conclusion, a reasonable assessment of whether or not I made the right decision. So in this video, I want to talk about whether or not I regret having dropped out of college. But before I explain whether or not I regret dropping out of college, I want to give some context as to why I dropped out in the first place. So, growing up, I hated school. I hated school. And this isn't necessarily unique per se, but I think that a lot of people, as they progress through their lives, they sort of come to accept the reality of their situation, which is that the structure of school is just a part of their lives. They go to school, they go to a higher level of school, so college, trade school, etc., and then they get a job. And that's basically how their lives will go. But I don't know what it is about my psyche, but I refused to accept that as a kid. I simply could not stomach the idea that I was going to have to wake up at a time I didn't want to wake up at. I was going to have to be around people that I didn't want to be around, no offense to any of my former classmates. And I would generally have to belong to a structure that I wanted no fucking part of. I could not grasp that idea in my mind. And to make matters worse, when I was a kid, I don't know if I've ever told this story on YouTube, but when I was a kid, I wanted to get my ears pierced. I want to say I was maybe 12 years old. And this was actually a long, ongoing discourse, a debate that I had with my parents, and particularly my dad. When I was 12 years old, this all came to a head. I asked him, "Can I get my ears pierced?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why? Why can't I get my ears pierced? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever." And what he told me, I don't know if he knows this, but what he told me was ultimately what solidified my decision to not work a 9 to 5. He told me that if I got my ears pierced, they would discriminate against me when it was time for me to get a job. Potential employers, that is, would discriminate against me. When he told me that, the conclusion became very obvious. I'm going to get my ears pierced, and then I'm not going to work at a 9 to 5. I didn't even know about entrepreneurship at this time, by the way, but I just knew in my heart from that moment on that I wasn't going to work a 9 to 5. And let me just backtrack. I hated school. I hated everything that it stood for, but I did very well in school. I wasn't the class clown. I wasn't somebody who was flunking classes. I wasn't somebody who was skipping classes. I got straight A's all the way through high school. And this was with me being a very absent-minded young man who had no interest in even learning about this structure. I just knew from my experiences within it that I didn't want to be a part of it. We're talking about somebody who didn't know that they were tracking class rank until halfway through sophomore year of high school, and still managed to finish in the top 7% of his class, in the 70s out of about 1,000 or 1,100 students. So I was somewhere between 70 and 80, if I recall correctly. Top 7, top 8%, whatever. And got into my dream school, UT Austin. Automatic admission. I was not some person who just blew off school. I hated school, but I was still good at it. And it's very important that I give that context, because if you're a teenager watching this and you resonate with the things I'm saying, you resonate with hating school, then you still need to apply yourself. While you're in school, while you're in that structure, I'm sorry to say, but you're fucking stuck. There's not really much you can do at this point in time. But while you're within that structure, you apply yourself, because if nothing else, you will at least develop the character traits necessary to actually make it as somebody outside of the structure. Because for as restrictive and difficult as that structure can be, it's actually much more difficult to not be a part of the structure. And I'll talk about that later on in this video. But anyways, back to the story with my dad. He told me I couldn't get my ears pierced, and he just wouldn't budge until I turned 16. I guess by that point, he realized that every few years I was going to keep bringing this up to him until he let me do it. And if he didn't, then as soon as I turned 18, I would just go and do it anyways. So at 16, he finally allowed me to do it. And I don't know where you live, but where I lived, where I grew up, 16 was the minimum age for most service level jobs, service industry jobs, restaurants, retail stores, cashiers at grocery stores, etc. So that same year, I decided that I was going to get my first job because, well, I wanted money and I was broke and I wanted to get new shoes. I wanted to get the video games. I wanted that stuff. And the only way I could get it was by getting a job. So I applied for jobs and only one of them called me back. That was IHOP. I went to IHOP. I pulled up in a suit, by the way, for this interview. Looking back on it, there was no reason for me to do that whatsoever, but I pulled up in a suit. I did the interview. He hired me on the spot. And then at the end of the interview, if you've ever been in a job interview, you know that at the end of the interview, they always ask you, do you have any questions for me? And I said, as a matter of fact, I do. Am I allowed to wear earrings on the job? And that man looked me in the eye and he said, no. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe it's a safety hazard or whatever. And I would agree with that. If that had been the case, it would have been fine. Except that women were allowed to wear earrings. I left out of that IHOP fully convinced that I wasn't going to take the job. I didn't care what new Jordans were coming out, what video games were coming out. I didn't give a single fuck about any of that. Because none of that mattered to me more than the principles on which I stood. But when I told people about my decision, they talked me into taking that job. Still the worst job I've had to this day. I made basically below minimum wage when you account for all of these weird little fees that they had. And the job itself was really shitty. Literally, I had to clean up shit off the floor. I had to clean up puke out of the bathrooms. IHOP is a 24-hour restaurant. So where do you think drunk people go when they want something to eat at 3 o'clock in the morning? They go to IHOP. And what do they do at IHOP? They throw up in the bathroom stalls. And who has to clean that? Me. I had to clean it. So literally a terrible job that I accepted just because I allowed other people who were part of the structure, who had simply accepted the reality of the structure, I allowed those people to convince me to take this shitty job. When really I could have just went and worked at a retail job where I could have worn my earrings, I could have worn whatever I wanted, I could have talked to girls, I could have gotten discounts on those same clothes that I wanted, and avoided all of that. But I'm glad to this day that I chose to work at IHOP because it showed me that my dad wasn't bullshitting. He was telling the truth. They would discriminate against you. There were rules, there were regulations, and I had to follow them. Fast forward to when I graduated high school. Again, top 7% with my sights set on UT Austin. If you don't know, UT Austin is the second best school in the state of Texas behind Rice University. And I think Rice is actually a private university. So UT Austin is the best public university. I graduated from high school with my sights set on UT Austin. I had already basically enrolled, more or less. I hadn't fully enrolled, but I had committed, if you will. And that was that. But then summer came around. And I started to get cold feet. Why did I get cold feet? Because I started to realize the reality of the situation. I started to project further in the future than those 4 years that I would be attending college. And what I quickly realized, and you can verify this for yourself, you can look up UT Austin cost of admission. What I quickly realized was that I was going to graduate with $100,000 in student loan debt. Because I had to stay on campus because I wasn't from Austin. My parents lived in Dallas. So I had to stay on campus or in an apartment, which would have been even more expensive. Tuition was already $12,000 a year. And I think I had a little baby scholarship for, I don't know, $1,000 a year, something like that. Basically, when you added it all up, it was $100,000 overall that I would owe to FAFSA at the age of 22, assuming I graduated on time. And listen, I don't know about you, but just thinking about that, just thinking about the fact that I could have owed that much money sends chills up my spine. And it definitely didn't sit well with me at the age of 18. So what did I do? I emailed the admissions office at UT Austin asking if I could defer my enrollment to 2019 instead. Graduated in 2018, so I asked them to defer my enrollment until the following year. And the idea was to take a gap year. But then, I don't know why, I guess maybe I let my parents convince me to do this or something, I don't know. Or maybe in an effort to save money, I signed up for community college instead. So the new plan was I was going to do community college. I was going to use community college to get all of the basic classes out of the way, which were basically more or less the same as the basic classes at UT Austin or any other university. And then I would transfer to UT Austin or whatever other university I wanted to go to at the end of my 2-year period in community college. And as an added bonus, I would be able to figure out my purpose. I would be able to figure out which major I should be doing. So I signed up for community college, and in August, I started. And that didn't go very well. Grades-wise, I did pretty well. I actually got a couple of B's, mostly because I knew within my heart that it wasn't really taking me where I wanted to go. You see, I had been told that community college was a place where you go to find yourself. And to say that I exhausted the resources at my disposal would be an understatement. I was visiting guidance counselors left and right. I was spending hours upon hours, no exaggeration, hours upon hours trying to figure out which major best suited me. I switched from business to sustainability to, I think, computer or web design to accounting to just all of these different things. I don't even remember what the majors were because none of them were even interesting to me. None of them were fascinating to me. Because again, I didn't want to work a 9-to-5. And for whatever reason, it just didn't occur to me at the time that any major that I picked was going to lead me down that path. Any major that I picked, there was no right choice because college wasn't meant for me. It wasn't meant for me. I wasn't meant for it. But I had, I guess, at some point in time, come to accept the reality of the situation until I didn't. In March 2019, I dropped out of college. I dropped all of my classes. I did it under the pretense that I was going to, again, take a gap year and figure out what I wanted to do. But I knew, based on the feeling of relief that I got when I dropped out, that I wasn't going to be going back. I knew I wasn't going back because what was there to go back to? What was there to go back to? It was just going to lead me to a 9-to-5. And listen, a lot of people think I'm anti 9-to-5. I'm not anti 9-to-5 at all. The world needs 9-to-5s. Society needs 9-to-5s to function. And some people are psychologically cut out for 9-to-5s. I just so happen to not be one of those people. I'm simply not one of those people. And again, this isn't from somebody who is incapable or incompetent within that structure. I thrived within that structure. But it didn't thrive in me. It didn't sit well within my spirit that I would potentially be slaving away at some company that I didn't want to work at, surrounded by people that I didn't want to be around at a time that wasn't convenient for me for the next 40 years of my life. And I would have to do it because I would have this debt. Even if I had graduated from community college and transferred to university, you would only be cutting the cost in half. So I still would have owed $50,000. $50,000, and I would have been obligated to pay that back with interest. So in other words, I would have had no choice but to work at a 9-to-5. That's how they get you. That's how they get you, is they get you in this debt, which, by the way, you can't file bankruptcy on student loan debt. So there's no getting rid of it. You have to pay it. And From there, they have you. You're stuck. You have to work a 9 to 5. And if that's the situation that you're in, my heart goes out to you. Maybe you can start a side hustle to pay it off faster. Or maybe you just keep working your 9 to 5 and you live with the decision that you made. Just like I live with the decision that I made. Now, to be fair, earlier I said that it is more difficult to operate outside of the structure than it is to operate within it. And that is true. I'm not rescinding that statement. It is very, very true. Because when you work at a 9 to 5, you clock out. You get a chance to clock out and psychologically decompress. You get a chance to at least have some semblance of a finish line. When you operate outside of that structure, not only do you not know where the finish line is, but you have to find the starting line. That's half the battle right there, is finding the starting line, which is figuring out what you're going to do. For me, it ended up being YouTube, which then progressed into life coaching. But for you, it might be something completely different. But it is really fucking difficult. But it's also so worth it. It's so worth it. And guess what? I've had ups and downs on my journey. There were times when things were not going my way. And to be honest, there were days when I regretted having dropped out of college. But those days are long gone. Those days are long gone. As somebody who has lived in my car, who has dealt with things that people go their whole entire lives without dealing with, I can say with 100% certainty that almost 6 years later, after I dropped out, I have no regrets whatsoever.